You may be asking why I'm drinking tea. Well, normally I'm kind of a coffee guy, but tea is a little more classy than coffee, and despite kind of the traditional looks of these aircraft, it's a pretty classy aircraft. So, the question is this the best backcountry aircraft that money can buy? Let's find out. Before we can figure out whether or not this is the best backcountry adventure aircraft on the market, we've got to ask ourselves, what is an adventure airplane? An adventure airplane is simply an aircraft that you can go places and do adventures. But what you do with it kind of depends on your mission set and what the aircraft is built for. This aircraft is based off the original J-3 Cub, and it's a tandem aircraft, so two people sitting front and back with a large storage area in the back. One of the advantages of this aircraft is you can take off just about anywhere and you can land just about anywhere. Whether you're on a grass strip, the side of a mountain, you're on a beach somewhere, or out in Alaska. This aircraft is really meant to kind of go anywhere. Super short takeoffs, super short landings, and we'll talk more about the details of that later. First, I think it's important to talk about kind of the background and the history of this company. Don and Ron have been rebuilding airplanes for decades. They originally started just by taking off the fabric, stripping it down to the bare essentials, rebuilding it, and after years and years and years of doing this, they started getting a lot of accolades. They became kind of well known in the community as the people to rebuild your Cub if you needed new fabric work done or whatever the case may be. After seeing everything from all the iterations of these types of aircraft, he saw all the great things that were in the design, but he also saw some of the problems that they had. And so his vision was, why do I keep spending all this time tearing down these airplanes and rebuilding these airplanes that have flaws or issues with them? And why don't I just start with my own airplane? And so that's what he did. He started with a proven airframe and just decided to make all the little tweaks that he could to it in order to get it to be the best aircraft, both from a pilot's perspective and a maintenance perspective that he possibly could. One of the things that really got my attention with Patriot to begin with is his attention to detail. The craftsmanship in these aircraft are pretty unique. These aren't mass-produced aircraft, and Don is very meticulous in his work and what he allows to come off of his production floor. I think a good example of that was that he was actually working on the fabric of one of the older aircrafts that he was redoing, got it done, put it through paint, and was looking at it and realized that the ribs weren't quite right. There was a little bit of bow in the stringing that happened. And instead of just saying like, it's good, this airplane's done, he took a razor blade to it, he cut the fabric, and he said, we're not gonna allow anything like this to go off of our floor. And I think that goes a long way in kind of showcasing what they're about and what it means to them to provide a world-class product. One of the other questions is, what type of aircraft is this? How is it certified? And this is actually, if you look on the door, it's actually certified as a experimental aircraft. A lot of people that aren't in the aviation world see that and get a little concerned of, what is this, just somebody building this in their backyard? And experimental is one of the things that has actually led to a lot of innovation within aviation. Certification of aircraft is definitely something that you could do with this airplane, but that's going to cost millions and millions of dollars, which would just be passed off to the consumer. And so instead of making an airplane that would be unreasonably expensive, which this is not a cheap airplane to begin with, he's decided to go ahead and build the best airplane, but then allow it to be modified based off of what the customer wants. So if you're into fishing or hunting, or you're gonna go hunt in the backcountry and you wanna pack out an elk, you can design the aircraft and modify it in order to suit the mission that you wanna do. With a certified aircraft, every time you make any type of modification, even with an airframe that you know is perfectly good, anytime you make any modification, the FAA you have to do an STC, this complete modification. It's expensive, timely, costly, and it really kind of inhibits the ability to customize the aircraft the way you want, which is what this aircraft is all about. A custom, bespoke aircraft that is tailored to what you want it to be. All right, so let's jump into some of the details about what makes this airplane unique from a technical perspective. Don's big idea is that he wants this airplane to have a low wing loading. What does that mean? That means you have a certain surface area of the wing that's creating lift, and you have a weight that is being put on that wing that you have to pick up. The lower that ratio is, the lower the weight is relative to the wing size, the lower the wing loading. The original J-3 Cub that this was based off of had a very low wing loading, and that's what made it so light, fun, nimble, and gave you the ability to take it almost anywhere and land almost any place. This airplane, there's a couple things that have been put into it in order to ensure that it has a low wing loading. First of all, surface area of the wing. This wing's actually a little bit bigger than traditional aircraft because just over time, you're going to have a slightly heavier aircraft than you had in 1940s when the original J-3 came out. You have a lower wing loading, but then keeping weight down is another critical component. And so they've resolved that a couple of different ways. One of the ways is by adding a ton of carbon fiber. The spinner that goes in front of the nose, that's carbon fiber. The cowling that goes around the engine, that's carbon fiber. Even the deck on the back onto the vertical fin, that's carbon fiber. The panels on the inside are carbon fiber. And when you add all that up ounce by ounce, you really start to save a lot of weight. Oh, did I mention the fuel tanks can be carbon fiber as well? Literally, there's more carbon fiber on this airplane than any other Cub type aircraft I've ever seen. In addition to that, they do a lot of other things like titanium landing gear. This has very lightweight titanium landing gear, keeps the overall wing loading down. Another way to keep wing loading down is to have a smaller, lighter engine. The problem with that is oftentimes when you have a smaller, lighter engine, you have less horsepower. And with these aircraft, in order to take off out of anywhere, have a great climb gradient to get over mountains, you need the power. What a lot of companies will do is they'll throw an IO360 into this aircraft. Well, an IO360 weighs about 330 pounds, and that way you can get close to 180 to 200 horsepower out of that engine. The other alternative is you can put an IO320 in. An IO320 traditionally has somewhere between 140 to 160 horsepower. Well, you can soup it up and get a little bit more out of it. You can do it safely if you're doing it the right way. This aircraft, for example, has an IO320 producing about 175 horsepower. This one from a company out of Lycon in California, and it's an IO320 that produces 197 horsepower. Now, you get the comparable power of a 360, but what about weight differences? Well, the IO360 is about 330. The IO320 averages about 245 pounds. This one from Lycon, they shave down some extra parts off of it and get another 25 pounds off of it. But then you combine that with the fact that the front part of the aircraft, there's a moment arm on that. And so in order to offset that, you have to do something in the back end. So either you design bigger tail feathers, you add weight in the back, you have to do something to offset that center of gravity difference. And all of that just increases wing loading in other aircraft. So nice and light. Now let's talk about landing gear. I already mentioned how this landing gear is titanium, and that's nice, light, strong. But one of the advantages of this one is that it also has oil struts which help absorb any impact energy. You combine that with the Tundra tires, right, those backcountry type tires, and it really can absorb a lot of energy. The advantage of that is if you're coming in as a normal pilot, you have a normal landing, you feel really good about yourself because landings are nice and smooth and soft. But if you want to land in a really short distance, it's important to come in real slow, right around the stall speed, and make sure that you land as slow as possible so you can stop as short of a distance as possible. Well, in order to do that, you have to really bring it in slow, get it to a stall, and then let it really plant on the ground. And with this landing gear, you can really do that. And that's what's kind of required in order to get these really good short distance landings so you can get into some really austere locations. What about the brakes? There's all kinds of brakes that you can put on an airplane, and Patriot has decided to put the best brakes on the market on this airplane. They're called Behringers, they're out of France, I know, but they're really good. One of the things I really like about them, as opposed to other brakes that I've flown, is that other brakes, you tend to apply pressure, and as you get to a certain stopping point, you get a lot more resistance. So it's a little nothing, little nothing, little nothing, and then you hit a point and it really starts to stop. The problem with that is that when you're in the backcountry, you want to be able to have pretty smooth, good control over your brakes so that your tail doesn't come up too much and you can potentially hit your propeller on the ground, which would be a bad day in the backcountry. What I really like about Behringer brakes is that as you apply the pressure, it's a linear application. And so the best analogy I can think about that is, for those of y'all who have not done a lot of flying, it's kind of like braking a car. As you apply the pressure, you're getting kind of a linear response in your stopping power. And so whether it's a tailwind that starts to push you to the side, a bump, a rock that you hit that starts to turn yourself to the side, or whatever the case may be, you have pretty quick linear controls, and it's a lot easier to judge how much pressure you need in order to have the airplane do what you want, which is obviously something you want as you're flying in the backcountry. What about the avionics, or all the instruments in front of you that tell you which way's up, which way's down, how fast you're going, things like that? Patriot uses, honestly, one of the world's best avionics systems. Most people think that the best avionics are in your airliners or anything like that, maybe the military. It turns out it's actually not that case. I fly both, and I can tell you they are not the most advanced avionics. This has a full Garmin suite with a fully coupled autopilot that can fly instrument approaches. It's got 2 GPS satellites, so you can shoot GPS approaches no problem, and the autopilot will actually fly it for you if you want. Not something you're normally going to worry about a whole lot in the backcountry situation, but when you're trying to get from point to point to go on these adventures, it's nice having that luxury and that option to be able to know that you have that functionality. There's synthetic vision on this, and what that means is that on your 10-inch glass display that's in front of you, you can actually see the hills, you can see the towers that are updated every month without having to actually see the ground. You can actually see what's going on around you. Now, you wouldn't want to use that in the clouds, but it's an incredible level of kind of safety and comfort of knowing what your surroundings are like. In addition to all that, you have things like ADS-BN, which tells you where all the other traffic is, what their altitude is, how fast they're going, even what their tail number is. And so a lot of what we do in these types of airplanes is we're not talking to air traffic control, we're not talking to different agencies because we're here in the backcountry. And so being able to have that same sight picture that air traffic control has is a huge advantage in being able to stay safe when you're flying. One of the features that I really like is if you push and hold the direct button, what it'll do is it'll set up a smart glide system. So you push, you hold it, the airplane's autopilot will automatically kick on, and you use this a lot if you have some type of mechanical issue. Say that you had a fuel leak, or you ran out of fuel, your engine stopped for whatever reason. You push and hold that button, the airplane will automatically couple the autopilot. It'll pitch for your best glide distance, so that you can glide the furthest distance. So it'll pitch up to maintain an airspeed. It'll give you your best glide, and it'll automatically point you towards your closest airport. Now, you can obviously turn it off if you have a field or something, you're not going to make it and you want to get somewhere else. But having that functionality and that capability, particularly for pilots who may not have as much experience in the backcountry, is just a huge safety factor. One of the features that I wasn't expecting to like as much as I did is a feature called the auto squelch. So traditionally in aircraft, you have to kind of adjust the squelch based off the sound of the engine or background noise in order to stop playing the background sound in your headset. Well, Garmin has this like really incredible thing called auto squelch, where there's a computer that's going in and determining where the background volume is, and if the background level is, it will set the squelch right at that level. So as soon as you start talking above that volume, you can start hearing each other, whether it's front seat or back seat. And I didn't think it would be as nice as it was, but I actually really love that feature. One last functionality of the Avionics that I really like, and this isn't the Garmin system, it could be incorporated with the Garmin. They use a different company, but is an AOA indicator that's on the top of your display. So above your glare shield, there's a little piece of glass that, much like a heads-up display in military aircraft, that will tell you what your angle of attack is. And the reason why I think that's so important and so critical to safety, particularly in the backcountry, is that instead of looking down and trying to judge what airspeed you're supposed to be at and how close you are to the stall, that number constantly shifting based off what your flap settings are, you can instead be heads out, looking out, and see what your angle of attack is. Once you have that calibrated, as long as you fly that angle of attack, whether your flaps up, flaps to, doesn't matter what the density altitude is, what the winds are, it's only judging what your angle of attack is, and once you exceed that angle, now you're gonna stall. So having that as a clear, direct, in front of you, clear line of sight is a huge impact on safety, not being heads down and not trying to remember a specific number, but just looking at a very simple display. All right, so what about flight controls? A lot of aircraft that have that heavier wing loading that we talked about earlier have to put larger flight control surfaces on, particularly on the tail, in order to be able to offset that extra weight that you have in the nose. This one can kind of keep the original design because it doesn't need that extra flight control surfaces. You have no problem getting a 3-point landing, even with nobody in the back seat and a fairly forward center of gravity. The one thing that's really cool, that really helps out a lot, is the massive ailerons that are on this airplane. And we'll talk about why that's important first, but they go all the way from the flaps to the very edge of the wingtips. And what you get out of that is that when you're at slow speeds and there's less airflow going over your wing, now when you put your flight control surface in, having a lot more ailerons means that you still have control authority. And where that's really important is when you're here in the backcountry. When you're slow, when you're low to the ground, and you get a gust of wind that pops over a tree or a ridge line that you weren't expecting, and it pushes that wing up, having the ability to quickly have the instantaneous response to bring the wings back to where you want is huge, not only from a comfort perspective and kind of how the airplane flies, but truly from a safety perspective. So there's a couple different options that you can choose for engines, depending upon your budget and really what your mission set is. If you're planning on taking this cross country a lot, or you're just gonna stay in the local area, it will kind of determine whether you want the Mark I Super Patriot or the Mark II Super Patriot. The Mark I Super Patriot is, it's got an IO 320, once again about 175 horsepower, and it has a ground adjustable prop. Ground adjustable prop is a fixed blade prop, for those of you who are familiar with that, meaning that the blade is set to a specific setting. The advantage of the ground adjustable is that you can actually adjust that on the ground in about 10 to 15 minutes. I got a video on it if you want to see. But you can adjust the pitch of the prop in order to achieve what you want out of it. If you want to adjust it to take a lot of bite out of the air when you're not moving really fast and take off in a very short distance, you can adjust that to that setting. If you want to cruise really fast because you're going to take 6 hours to go to this backcountry area, you're coming to the Ozarks, you're going wherever, you can adjust the pitch of that prop so that as you get faster, it can spin faster and be able to get you to a location quicker. If you're staying in the local area or not really going cross country a lot, it's a great option and it stays fairly cheap. Consequently, the Mark II has a 197 horsepower, and one of the cool things that it has about it is it actually has a constant speed prop. What that means is the pitch of the propeller is constantly adjusting in order to provide the maximum RPM that you can. So without having to get out and adjust the prop, you can go to full throttle and take off in as short of a distance as the propeller will allow you. And also you can, when you get to cruise, that blade pitch adjusts, and now you can go as fast as possible. So you really kind of get the advantage of both worlds with one propeller. The other thing that's nice about the Mark II is they have shifted from a 2-blade prop to a 3-blade prop. Most aircraft you see on the market like this are going to be a 2-blade prop, and the 3-blade prop looks a little small, but you don't need the extra size because you have 3 blades. The other advantage you get from the slightly smaller carbon fiber prop is that you have a lot more ground clearance, which is a factor in the backcountry. So normally when you take off, you raise the tail off the ground, drop your nose down in order to get as little drag over the wing as possible. With the 3-blade prop, you can bring it even further without a risk of that propeller hitting the ground. The other problem that some people have is when they come and they land, they hit the brakes really hard, they'll bring that tail up. And if they do it too fast, they could strike that prop. So the smaller 3-blade prop gives you just as much pull, but a significantly more ground clearance, and you can take off in a short distance and go fast without ever having to change the prop on the ground. All right, so now we talked about a little of the technical features. Let's jump inside the cabin. One of the first things you'll notice is really high-end, classy leather surrounding, right? The front seat actually adjusts forward and back. So for somebody like me who's about 5'10", I can fly around with the seat in kind of a middle position, maybe a little bit forward. And once I get up to cruise, I can just click a switch and kind of slide back, stretch the legs out, and really be pretty comfortable on those long cross countries. We've put people who are 6'4", 6'5" in this airplane, and they've said that they've never been able to fit in an airplane like they have this airplane. Looking into the back seat, what you'll notice is the back seat is significantly wider than a traditional Cub. It's about 4 inches wider. And so what that does is that allows larger people to feel fairly comfortable, whether you're taller or you got broad shoulders. A good analogy here is if you've ever flown a Cessna 172, how tight you feel with your flight instructor in that, and then you jump into 182 and you just feel like there's a little bit more space, right? Additionally, that wide seat allows, if you have 2 small children, they can easily fly in the back seat at the same time. Sitting in the front cockpit, you'll notice on the left-hand side is your flap switch. It's a mechanical switch that brings the flaps down. And it's really nice because you can bring it up and down fairly quick. You're not relying on a motor or anything like that. You can just pop it up, pop it down, helps you get off the ground or climb at a faster rate if you need to, or lift the flaps when you're ready pretty easily. One of the things I like about this feature as opposed to some others is that instead of having to reach up there, grab a button, squeeze the button in order to get the flaps down, you just pull. Anywhere on the handle, just grab the handle and pull, and you immediately have the flap settings you want. As you move over to the left a little bit, what you'll notice is that the cockpit has kind of wraparound screen. It kind of feels like a bit of a fighter jet. It's not just a straight flat panel. And so by bowing the cockpit a little bit, what you do is you allow a little bit more space for the pilot, but also you just feel more immersed in the cockpit. Looking in the center of that, what you'll notice is a giant 10-inch glass display. And this display can do just about anything that you want. Normally when I fly around in GA, I always have an iPad with my ForeFlight on. I stick it to either my knee or a window or something like that. And this is honestly the first airplane that I just keep it in my bag. I don't even bring it because all the data is right there. I've got synthetic vision, so I can see towers and mountains around me. I've got ADS-B, so I can see traffic around me. I can go to any airport in the country, tap on it, and now I have the current weather information, so what the ceilings are, what the winds are doing, conditions. I can see any NOTAMs that are at that airport. It gives me all of my frequencies. And so just having that SA all right in front of you, super easy access, is a huge advantage. Going on adventures, you're gonna have issues with hot and cold, right? Flying in the middle of Texas in summer, it's gonna be brutal, right? You want some air conditioning. If you are in the middle of Wisconsin in the winter, or Alaska, it's gonna be freaking cold. I've flown in both of those conditions in this airplane, and the nice thing is when it's really hot outside, you don't have air conditioning per se, but what you do have is 2 windows and a door that open up. So the left window opens up and there's a great locking mechanism, same on the right, and that door drops down. And with those combined, with 100 miles an hour flowing over you, it's actually really pleasant. Even when it's out on the ground, once you get in the airplane, it's actually really, really nice. As far as the cold, there's actually 3 different vents. So there's a vent for the front seat, a vent for the back seat, and a vent for the defrost in case you have any moisture that's collecting on the front windscreen. And you just pull those out and the airplane gets warmed up pretty quick and pretty toasty, even in the coldest situations. Over on the left-hand side where the head jacks go, what you'll notice is that there's both LEMO plugs and traditional aviation plugs. The LEMO plugs are really nice because you just plug them in and you don't need batteries. So how many times have you had your noise canceling headphones that you've been flying around in and halfway through the flight they die, or you realize they've been left on and now you have no battery? These actually pull power from the airplane. So as soon as the airplane cranks up, they automatically turn on, noise canceling automatically plays. But if you want to plug in something else, you got a different set of headset that you want to use. There's honestly 4 different headsets for a 2-place airplane, makes it kind of nice. Now let's talk about storage. And what I really want to talk about is what they call the turtle deck. It's actually based off of something that happened in World War II, where the L4, which was the World War II military version of this airplane, was used as a aeromedical like evac aircraft. And so they had this section of the back that would actually lift up and you could put a full stretcher of somebody in it. That gave them the idea that, why don't we do something like that here? Open up the space and make it a place that you could have a lot of stuff, potentially even lay down in if you want. And so I haven't had the chance to do it yet, but what I'm going to is we're gonna go camping with this airplane, and this is gonna be my tent. Leave your tent at home. You've got about 6'5" of space back there, a fairly flat space. Bring a pad, bring your sleeping bag and a pillow, and you've got your tent with you. Just lighten up the load and make your footprint even less. All right, so we talked about the technical specifications and kind of the cabin, the amenities that you have there, but what people really care about is how does it fly? I've flown a lot of different tailwheel aircraft, and honestly, this is the easiest tailwheel I've ever flown for a couple of different reasons. One, the wing loading is fairly light, and so it's super easy to control the tail. Tailwheel aircraft, for those of y'all who don't have a lot of flying experience, it's kind of like pushing a shopping cart. If you fly a traditional aircraft where your main nose is in the front, and your 2 main wheels are on the back, your center of gravity is between the 2. It's like pushing a shopping cart. You push it, you let it go, assuming that it's not a knocked out one. It's gonna continue to track straight, right? If you push it sideways, it's gonna straighten up and continue to go straight. Tailwheel are like the opposite. It's like taking a shopping cart, holding the front of it, pushing it backwards and pushing it and letting it go. The second that that center of gravity leaves the front 2 wheels and starts to shift around, what does the shopping cart do? It spins around real quick. All tailwheels have that same threat. This one, because of the light wing loading and because of the real nice controls that you have within the brakes, just gives you an incredible control of your center of gravity, in addition to your landing gear really making it easy to have a hard landing. Even a hard landing, you just be like, oh yeah, I was trying to have a short field landing, right? So it flies really, really easily for a tailwheel airplane. What about its performance? So I had this airplane for about 2 days and I took it to a STOL competition, or a short takeoff and landing competition. Packed the sun in the back, all of our camping gear, flew down to Texas from Arkansas and competed. I'd had a little bit of experience in this airplane, but this one was kind of a different beast. So what were the numbers? When we were flying there, it was kind of a normal day, not too hot, not too cold. We didn't have a whole lot of wind in front of us, maybe 3-4 knots. And my takeoff distance was in 61 feet, which is pretty ridiculous for any type of airplane. But being able to take off in 61 feet is just absolutely ridiculous and shows how you can get this airplane out of pretty much anywhere. What about landing? Well, like I said, I'd only had the airplane for 2 days, and so I wasn't as good as I could have been of really hanging it right on the stall line. And my landing distance was right around 80 feet, right under 80 feet. So once again, land it just about anywhere. All right, so you can take off in short distances, you can land in short distances, but what about cruise? Right, it's one thing to be able to get to the location, but what about if it takes you 10 hours to get somewhere that another airplane would take 2? Well, these aircraft aren't necessarily known for being the fastest. Oftentimes they'll cruise around 90 miles an hour, decently, right? This one, depending upon the weight that I have in the back, I elect for anywhere between 120 to 130 miles an hour, which is pretty fast for this type of Cub, especially one that has the bigger wings, creates a little bit more drag. The power and the way that this constant speed prop works, you can get places quick for this type of airplane. Let's talk about a situation that you will probably get yourself into with this airplane, whether you like it or not, so you better practice it, is stalls. How does it stall? Aircrafts and their designs all have different ways that they stall. Some are scarier than others, but this aircraft is an extremely, I would say, benign stall aircraft. So when you're stalling the aircraft, I recommend you do it at altitude when you're first practicing. Hold the stick back until you eventually get to an angle of attack where you lose the airflow over the top of the wing, you lose your lift, and now you start sinking. This aircraft, as you go to stall and you bring the stick back, you will get the stick all the way back, and then when it starts to stall and you lose that lift over the top of the wing, the nose just gently drops and immediately starts picking up flying airspeed again, and it'll start to rise again. And it'll just kind of go through that iterative process of stalling and rising, and your sink rate is somewhere between 800 to 1,000 feet per minute, which is not very fast. The other thing is, if you do start to stall and you get your AOA a little bit too high, as soon as you add any throttle, what you're doing is you take that big fan blade in the front, push the air all over the wings, and now you immediately start getting flying airspeed over your front wing as well as your elevator. So any power addition immediately pulls you out of the stall. So overall, it's a very easy airplane to fly, and when you do start getting into a stall situation, it handles it really well. There's really no asymmetry, and it's just a comforting airplane to fly. All right, so we talked about how it handles. What about how it looks? When you're looking out, you have glass all around you. As far as the eye can see, up in front, on top, you can see in almost all directions. The only limitation, and just because it's a high wing aircraft, is you do have the wings in the way, but outside of that, you can see all down the back, all on top, and all on the sides. Plus, you can open up those windows, easily lock them into place, drop the door, and now you've got your landing gear that you can see real easily. It is one of the most immersive experiences in aviation that's out there. My son, he's 8 years old, and he has had the chance to fly with me, fortunately, in a lot of different aircraft. He loves airplanes. We've flown in Mustangs, we've flown in other GA aircraft, but his favorite aircraft to fly by far is this one. And that's because in the summertime, we raise the windows, we drop the door, we're just skimming trees as we're going to land in backcountry airstrips, and it just feels like you're flying like a bird. And so that's something that's really cool about this airplane.
So one of the priorities for Patriot is that not only is it a good airplane to fly, but Patriot wanted to make sure that it was an easy airplane to work on. Airplanes are notoriously hard to reach places, bolts that are tough to get access to. And these aircraft in particular have some significant challenges when it comes to accessing certain points. One of the advantages is on the side over by the avionics. Normally, you're sitting on your back like a turtle on his back inside the cockpit trying to get access to all the wires and everything that's happening up with the avionics. This airplane has a panel you just remove with a couple screws, and now you're just sitting in a chair accessing the avionics, and little things like that are all over the airplane. For example, underneath the seats, right? So normally these aircraft are fabric all the way underneath these seats, and traditionally, like in Super Cubs, for example, there's little holes that go down in there, and if you drop something, a pin, a screw, an iPhone, whatever it is, now it's gone forever, right? It falls down in that fabric and eventually slides back towards the tail until either you replace the skin, you cut into the skin, or that object rubs between the frame and the skin and works itself out. What Patriot decided to do is they have a panel on the bottom. It's just a metal panel, light aluminum sheet, and you take some screws, you undo it, And now you can get access to all those components. I can speak from personal experience because I have had a few pieces that have fallen in those. And within 2-3 minutes, we're able to drop that panel, retrieve what we need, and put back up. Another kind of really easy access maintenance point that doesn't seem like a big deal, but really is for maintainers, is where the fuselage meets the rudder. That spot is a notoriously important spot to check for inspection purposes because it's where a lot of your rear flight controls are at, right? Your elevator, your rudder, your pitch trim actuator, so if you're gonna trim the nose up and down. And historically, say on a Super Cub, for example, if you have an issue where you need to inspect that or you need to change something, the only way to gain access to that is literally you take a razor blade and you cut the fabric, you do the work in a very difficult part, then you put a patch on top of that. This airplane actually has a carbon fiber section on that with a couple of screws. You unscrew it and you have complete unlimited access from almost any angle. It just makes it super easy to work on. So what category does this airplane fall in? We talked about the airplane already a little bit, but the J-3 Cub was kind of the grandfather of these aircraft. J-3 Cub was built in the 30s, used throughout World War II, and then just extremely prolific after the war because it was a cheap, fun airplane to fly that almost anybody could afford. And so that was the genesis of kind of the original adventure airplane. As the years have gone on, we've had kind of the next generation of aircraft, what I call Generation 2, which would be like the Super Cub, right? So if y'all are familiar with Super Cubs, they're all over Alaska, and they are great aircraft, and they take that original concept and really improve it in a lot of different ways. Now what we're looking at is kind of the 2023, 21st century of that, and the third generation of these types of aircraft, which have taken all of the lessons learned from the previous ones and all the technology that we've advanced to make the best version of that. Like I said, this airplane is meant to be enjoyed, not just sit in the hangar somewhere. And one of the ways that Patriot's actually looking to solve that problem is to create a flying community. So as a Patriot owner, much like other kind of high-end cars, you now become a part of a club. And the Patriot community is setting up adventures so that owners have the option to go different places. You want to go to the Bahamas and go fly on beaches? Well, that's going to be a trip, right? You want to come to the Ozarks and really hop around the Ozarks and do things, go hunting, go fishing those different places, go to Utah. You want to make a trip to Alaska? These are really what Patriot has in its vision for its owners to be able to go places, do things. And this is helped out by the fact that there's not going to be a lot of owners because they're not going to make that many airplanes. So every company has a motto, and Patriot's motto is for the uncharted. It's an adventure airplane meant to go anywhere, built for your exact mission set and what you want to do as a pilot. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions about the Patriot or what its capabilities are or anything like that, drop them in the comments below. If you had a Patriot and you were going to go somewhere, where would you want to go? Who would you want to take with you and why? And then if you've ever had the chance to fly any adventure airplanes or flown in an airplane, say your granddad had a J-3 Cub, tell us those stories below. General aviation has kind of a unique scale and size in America, and it's a symbol of freedom that we have here in America that doesn't really exist at the same level anywhere else in the world. You can go wherever you want, you can do whatever you want, and with aviation, it can get you there to go do those things. So get out there, go fly, have fun, fly safe, and get out in the uncharted.